Delighted to be talking once more with author Jasmine Warga. Jasmine, how are you?
I'm great. I'm also delighted to be here. Staying warm. It's very chilly here. I don't know how it is where you are, but actually, I can't say that because it warmed up to 20 degrees today, which basically feels like spring
Wow.
here. So,
Yeah, definitely so. And I know you for work in worlds like Other Words for Home, A Rover's Story, The Shape of Thunder. We're talking about a book on this episode, The Unlikely Tale of Jason Finnegan. So you have quite the book stack that you've accomplished over the years.
yeah, it's getting larger. It's exciting. It's like this is actually kind of the first time where I had that reflection of being like, wow, it's like a collection now, of getting to see that. And that's kind of cool to see it as sort of a body of work and look at that trajectory and sort of think about each book and the how it came to be and it's sort of its place in that stack. So yeah, feeling really grateful for that. I get asked sometimes at school visits like, do you have a goal of how many books you want to write? And I've never thought that way. I've never thought in terms of quantity. But it is kind of a cool thing because publishing is a hard industry, as I'm sure you
Hmm.
know. And so to have any kind of longevity feels really feels really exciting. And I never take that for granted.
Yeah. They are getting to the doorstopper phase. They're almost stacked against the door enough to shut it. Probably they are by now. And I've enjoyed your work since I first discovered you, and have been using your work in classes since then. What is a new challenge? What are you taking on now as a writer as you're continuing to craft and grow?
Yeah, well, I mean, the book that we're gonna talk here about was a challenge in that it was my first um, attempt at writing from the point of view of animals, which I'd obviously done a non-human perspective in Rover. But animals are different in that we actually know more about like the inner working of animals and how they perceive the world. So there was more like actual facts to go off of to build that out, which was both helpful and also its own challenge when you have some restraints like that. But was also really fun and exciting. And then as we sit here, the book that I'm wrestling with is my first companion novel that I've ever done. So it's a companion book to a Rover story, very different from a Rover story, which I'm trying not to be too anxious about calling it a companion, but they are linked. They are linked. There's a familiar character who shows up, but it takes hundreds of years in the future on Mars. But that's kind of a creative challenge to like, how do I write a book that's uniquely its own and stands on its own, which is really important to me, but still have it feel satisfying to those readers that want to like kind of revisit that world.
Continuing to flex the muscles and practice what you can do with the written word. I love it. I'm curious about, I know that the current book is maybe kind of an upper elementary book into middle grades in the way that it's written, although certainly anyone could um, pick it up and enjoy it. What's it like to write across age groups and to sort of explore questions across age groups for readers?
Yeah, I mean, I think middle grade is so interesting because it's such a wide category, right? And that it kind of like starts with third grade. You could have a precocious second grader, all the way to eighth grade. And so within middle grade, there's different kind of like, I guess, silos. And a Rover Story was a book that I thought of as kind of being for that like third to fifth grade set, which is kind of how I see Chase and Finnegan, but has scaled. And I actually go to a lot of middle schools where they use it with their sixth and seventh and eighth graders. And I think it's because of the actual science that's in the book and you can ask the questions that it asks, you can access from lots of different um points. And if you're coming at it from a little bit of this like older being sixth grade, but for our context is the vantage
Hmm.
point, you're going to see something different maybe than you would if you're coming at it in third grade. And I think the same is true for Chase and Finnegan. So I think that it's a book that will work really well for like our third to fifth grade set. And it has those like shorter chapters. I hope that maybe could work as a read aloud in a classroom, but it also has a lot of questions about sort of abandonment and learning to trust again and grief and self-acceptance and those self-destructive behaviors we can have when we don't have self-acceptance. And so I think that all of those things are like really relevant when you're 9 and also probably really relevant when you're 13, I hope.
Mhm.
And again,
Mhm.
it's similar to Rover's story in that the program that the book's based on is an actual real life program. So I feel like there's a lot of like outside the book classroom applications that could be done, like looking into that, thinking about interspecies friendship, how that works, how that communication works. And so I think that's always sort of the balancing act with middle grade is how do you write a book that honors a specific age group, but try to make it so there's enough there that you can kind of widen your net a little bit, that it can be a book that can work for the most possible kids. And so that is sort of how I see it. As hopefully a book that can start those conversations. And again, I think those conversations look different in a third grade classroom than they do in a seventh grade classroom. But I hope that they could be had in both classrooms.
Yeah, on the teaching side, it's always good to find books that have those threads that you can pull on that kind of travel across and that can appeal to readers of a variety of ages because we're always on the search for what is working best with readers.
Yeah. No, I think a lot about the books that I encountered in school when I was that age, and that informs like how I think about the books that I write.
Yeah, yeah. What was the inspiration for Chase and Finnegan? Where did this story come from? I'm thinking
Yeah.
about animal stories that I've read and seen over the years, and just curious how this came to be.
Yeah, so I always love animal stories. I've been hesitant to write one just because of the conversations that we've had in Kidlit that I think are so needed about representation. And I think when I was kind of first coming into publishing, there was like a really alarming stat that was going around about how there were like more animals in books than there were kids of color. And as someone who never saw myself in a book as a kid, like representation is something that's really important to me. It's something I take seriously as, you know, an Arab American wanting to represent my community, wanting those kids to see themselves and their friends in books. And at the same point, then sitting and thinking like that I don't think diversity is limited to the character that's in the book. I think there's also the perspective of the author. And so, this many books in, as we talked about my stack, I wanted to write an animal book because I loved animal stories when I was a kid. And I think it would have meant a lot to me to have an animal story written by someone from my background because I think that informs how I wrote it, how I thought about it, the themes that I chose to weave into the book. And so in lots of ways, it's a long time in the making as someone who, you know, grew up on obviously Charlotte's Web, but Where the Red Fern Grows and Shiloh and all of these like amazing animal stories. And then I was at the Cincinnati Zoo. Actually, I'm originally from Cincinnati. We were back in Cincinnati visiting my parents. And I went with my kids to see this new cheetah run exhibit, which is a really breathtaking experience to see these animals go from like 0 miles per hour to 90 miles per hour in the span of like 3 seconds. But while watching the cheetahs, there was a dog there, and the trainer was explaining that the dog was the cheetah's companion and buddy and made it possible for the cheetah to feel comfortable enough to like basically be there and perform for us. And I was like, oh my God, this is like all the things that I love to write about mental health and how our friends make us braver. And what does it mean to be friends with someone who's different from you? And I couldn't believe that this was like a real project at zoos, program at
Mhm.
zoos. And then when I was in fourth grade, I actually did my biography report on the lead cheetah trainer at the Cincinnati Zoo at the time, who kind of founded the big cat program at the Cincinnati Zoo. And so this feels like it was, how many ever years in the making, to get to go back and revisit that. I've always been fascinated by cheetahs and big cats. But that experience a couple of years ago at the zoo is what really sparked it, because that was my first time really learning about the dogs and the cheetahs.
Yeah. As you've hinted there, setting stories with animals and exploring those relationships, the research side of everything that you can pull in with animals, that opens up a lot to explore, metaphorically in so many ways, but also true to the relationships that animals have and that we humans have. What did the animal protagonists allow you to sort of open up that you've not been able to tap into quite as much, or that has been a steady theme for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that really came out is, so Chase, who's the cheetah character, she feels a deep connection, right, to the cheetahs in the wild, but she's never met them. She's never been to Africa. And I was thinking a lot about being first generation Palestinian American and having never been to Palestine, and still feeling this deep connection to that culture and my family. Um, and then she feels a lot of pressure to represent cheetahs. She's the only cheetah at the zoo. And growing up, I was often the only person of Middle Eastern background, only Muslim person in the room, and felt lots of pressure to represent my community in a certain way. Um, and how stressful that can be to feel like you have to audition, right, for people's understanding and empathy. And so obviously Chase's story is very different from mine, but that emotional arc, that felt like a nerve, a way kind of into her and to understand her. And then Finnegan, who's the dog character, he thinks he's a bad dog. He previously lost his home that he had before, for behavioral reasons. And I was able to explore this other side of feelings like I had as a kid, of this idea that I had to be perfect, that my behavior had to be perfect all the time for me to be worthy of being loved. I often felt like my perfect behavior was like a mask that I wore, that I wasn't actually good. And I think Finnegan has all of those feelings. And so, again, very different to write about it from the perspective of a dog. But I think something that a lot of kids can relate to, this idea of like, is our behavior the reason people love us? Or are we lovable even in moments where we feel that we are unlovable? And what does that look like? Is that really what actually love looks like? And the book kind of explores that. And I feel like I was able to explore all of those things more freely, like even just talking about what I just talked about, with feeling like the only one and the pressure of representation. I don't know if I could write about that in a contemporary book. I don't know if I'm ready yet or will ever be ready to, like, it would just feel very like head on for me and a certain protagonist. But I was able to wrap that in this story. It's almost like abstraction sometimes makes you able to be even more emotionally honest than you can when you hit something like straight on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry if anyone is hearing this, that is my dog, my rescue dog trying to break into the office. He's pawing at the door.
Totally welcome.
Um,
Totally welcome.
but I don't think we missed anything. I think the only thing I would add is that, well, the book I think does hopefully have a lot of this meat, cover a lot of these weighty themes. I also hope it's a book that kids are really going to enjoy reading. I thought about how much like I loved reading animal stories. And I hope they find it really like fun, that there's like humor in it, that there's a dog's perspective. And so I am as proud of, I guess, the lightness that's in the book as I am of the heaviness. And I hope that that's woven together like in a satisfactory way.
Absolutely. I have the book on Kindle from reviewing it. and it is insatiably readable.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
That's really
Yeah,
nice. I appreciate that.
truly, truly. With that, where can people find out more about you, teacher visits, classroom visits, other things of that nature, and follow along with your work?
Yeah, so my website, jasminewarga.com. Also, I'm probably the most active on Instagram. It's Jasmine Warga Books. And if you go there, I've actually just recently posted the tour graphic for Chase and Finnegan. I'm doing a couple of different public events. So if you're in the Chicago area, the Cincinnati area, the Columbus area, Tucson, Arizona, or Dallas, Texas, like the North Texas area, I would love to see you at any of those events. I'd also love to come to your school. I do those. I do organize my visits through Author Village, the wonderful folks at Author Village. So if you just Google Author Village, or I think it is authorvillage.com, they have all the information there of how to contact them and learn more about kind of how to bring me to your school. And so I think that's sort of the rundown on where you can find me. And yeah, so I hope to connect with you in some way.
Okay, great. Well, Jasmine, always glad to have you on. Always glad to talk about your work. And I'm always glad to see when there's a new title with your name on it. You handle topics and characters and all of the things very well for readers of all ages. So glad to have you back anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. This is always a delight.